for many of your movies, you have either it might be an article you've read or an image or something that triggers the movie for you. Do you want to talk about what that was for Blowout?
Well, Blowout was when I was mixing Dress to Kill. I had this, sound designer named Dan Sable who had worked for me for a whole bunch of movies. And in Dress to Kill, we were talking about, we literally, it's literally the line where there's like a wind effect. And I hear this wind effect, and I look over at Dan, I said, Dan, we've used that wind effect for the last 4 movies. Don't you have anything new?
You do the shit.
Oh, is that
yeah,
right?
like that wind in the trees. It sounds like you're whistling in the crap.
That's the library stuff. We used it a million times.
That is the trouble. I have heard it a million times. Now get something new.
New wind.
Yeah.
Got it.
And he says, well, what do you want me to do? I said, why don't you go out and record some new wind effect, And he said, sure, okay. So he goes out in his backyard in the country and with this microphone, and he records this new wind effect. So that was sort of the idea of this sound man that had to record these effects, who was working for this sort of schlocky horror film company. Then, of course, there's the Kennedy assassination, all the pictures. And then the idea of, well, if you put all those pictures together, and then you sync them up, which is something, if you've edited films, you're very familiar with syncing things up with claps and sounds. So that, I thought, well, that whole idea where you could show something particularly filmic, like blow up, you're blowing up a picture. The conversation, you're trying to weed through all the ambient sounds to figure out what the conversation is. This was something particularly cinematic where, you actually see how you sync something up, which is the clue to the mystery. It's just the deadly clue of the blowout.
I like how much time you take also with when Travolta gets into all of it and he's syncing everything up. And you couldn't really do that now because it's all done on computer. And,
No, but it's having worked in an editing room and syncing up rushes, and when you don't have anything to sync up with, you're looking for some kind of slap or some kind of percussive sound where you can sync the sound up to.
You've dealt with this your whole career, but I mean, you have a lot of people come trying to analyze your films and find out what's really personal or what are De Palma's obsessions. But in a lot of ways, I find picking locations that are familiar to you so that you know how to approach them, and it has a familiarity, it sort of allows you to approach it cinematically in a way that maybe opens and frees you up. In some ways is really what is I think, the most important personal aspect of filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to you many times. I mean, when you start a movie with a helicopter shot of New York, it's like, is this an idea? Oh, we're in Manhattan? Or, these boring drive-ups where the whole opening of the movie is a car driving up to a building. I mean, this is not an idea, because especially in the beginning of a movie where the audience is ready for anything, to waste that time with some boring geography shot is like, it mystifies me.
I mean, how aware are you when obviously you're aware of, that you're starting with a fake movie and all this, but are you playing with yourself at all there, or sort of at this point you've got this reputation, and here you're starting a movie with something that's so crassly sexist and violent, and are you thinking about that at all when you do it, having fun with the audience, or are you?
Yeah, I mean, I must say when we shot that, we were laughing every take, because it was so, the girls running, with the dancing and the girl in the shower, the girl making on the floor, the girl masturbating in a room. I mean, every take we added something else, something, more obscene,
Well, I love even just a shower on the door, so you know what that's going to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
after, because it was such a hard, much of the film was very arduous to shoot in the Wissahickon Creek because of these huge lighting setups. We have to deal with owls and frogs and, all kinds of things that are difficult to deal with. Then we had this one fabulous, where we didn't have any of the principals in it. We just had this sort of cheap horror film we were shooting with all these girls, at this, whatever college or that was supposed to be. And we just had a lot of fun. We were using a Steadicam. I'd never used one of those before. And with Steadicam shots, as you sort of choreograph things, you get different ideas and you change it and you adjust the players and the position of the camera to make the shot, flow as seamlessly as possible. This whole thing when he goes into the shower and then we see him, the guy holding the knife in the mirror, who was basically a pretty scary looking guy that I think he was not exactly old there either, so getting him to be in the right position when Garrett pans over to see him in the mirror, and then for the poor girl that has to stay in the shower during the whole shot until we come on and pull the curtain aside. We had a lot of fun. We really enjoyed ourselves.
This was the first time you used Steadicam?
Yes. Bill Mosigman, who shot the film, said, Garrett's got this rig he's designed himself, and we should try it for this shot. And Garrett Brown, the guy that invented the Steadicam, came to where we were shooting in Philadelphia and shot that first shot in Blowout. I mean, having shot a lot myself, I shot all my movies up to, I guess it was, I shot in The Wedding Party, and I shot Dionysus in '69, but I had an Eclair. That was the first sort of handheld camera. And I shot a lot of documentaries with it. So I was very used to, the movement and how to, choreograph shots. But this was a whole new thing. Of course, the steadiness of it.
Do you want to talk about sort of some of your collaborators in the movie, like working with Pino you'd worked with before?
Well, I had worked with Pino before. I'd worked with Bill Most before. Paul Hirsch, the editor, John Lithgow from Obsession.
Travolta
from Carrie. Yes, these are, people I was very close to. Nancy, my wife at the time. So it was a wonderful making process, of the making of the movie process. I was shooting in Philadelphia, a city I loved and grew up in. All the locations I had been to when I was a kid growing up in Philadelphia.
I love the score. There's something very, it almost seems to play some kind of undercurrent of the inevitability of that relationship.
Yeah, doomed. Basically doomed. Now, Pino, with Pino, who did my first score, Carrie, and then Dress to Kill, he speaks sort of not too good English, and I speak sort of not too good Italian, but somehow, having made so many pictures together, we managed to communicate in hand signals or whatever. And he did an extraordinary score there. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And with Pino, I would usually, lay out temp tracks and give him some idea of what some composers don't like temp tracks. Morricone does not like temp tracks. You just have to sort of describe what you're doing to him, or give sort of classical references. Pino, I can give, scratch tracks to, and he sort of gets what you're going for.
There's something about the editing in this one also because it's kind of this other subtext about filmmaking and about process and about sound and picture, you do that thing where you keep coming back. Yeah.
Yes. Well, because I had to find two ways to shoot that because he was going to remember it. Now, obviously, the easiest way is to shoot it from his point of view, which is how he remembers it. You know, when he's sitting in the chair.
Right,
and
you do the reverse
and
when he
he's
goes
holding,
back.
yeah, exactly. He's holding the pencil and he's moving it around, and I can cut to his point of view of what he sees, whether it's the lovers on the bridge or the frog or the owl, you know, until the car comes. So that was I had that in my mind for when he recalls where the sounds were. But when I was going to shoot the initial sequence, I had to figure out how am I going to shoot this from a different perspective. And I got this idea of boom, 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 you know. And it's sort of an idea I kind of use in Snake Eyes, where you have to go through the same thing again. The first time I keep it on the people watching the fight and never show the fight. And then when everybody recalls things, then you start seeing the fight from various points of view. But you just hear the fight the first time. Mm-hmm. And this was very much the same idea, was we're doing these elaborate pullbacks, but we're never seeing his point of view. We're saving that information for when he's recalling.
There's also something just very dynamic about that jumping back. It's for this movie particularly about the individual and then the world around you and what you can hear and what you can't hear and what's happening that you don't know. And I mean, similarly, the shots, you know, sort of from the ceiling, you know, when his place is trashed or when he's sort of like leaning back on his couch, and you have this sort of sense, or outside his window, that the camera is another.
The growing paranoia.
Yeah, yeah. Do you, just sort of thinking about that, do you want to talk about the shot when he realizes his tapes are erased and that you go around?
Yeah, that was, I don't know where I got, and I mean, you know, I'm always trying to figure out where the camera is in relationship to the material. I always have been saying and have said for years that the position of the camera is as important as what you're photographing. A dirty word to me is coverage, you know, two-shot, over the shoulder. You know, it's stuff you see, you know, all the time. It just drives me crazy because this to me is not directing. You have to think about where the camera is in relationship to the material. And this whole kind of swirling idea of all those tape machines turning, and then the whole idea of, you know, everything's been erased. You know, and it becomes more and more that sound of white noise comes louder and louder, going faster and faster and faster as we go around. And a very tricky shot to do because, you know, nobody could be in the set. You know, Vilmos and I were overlooking the set, and, you know, and I was cueing people, you know, to come in, and, you know, and the camera's making this relentless thing, which is somewhat the inverse of what was going on in Carrie when they're dancing and we're in a low position and we see all those lights up and we are going around them as they are spinning. It's going faster and faster and we're racing around them like this, you know, which is also a shot in Obsession when they meet at the airport and they embrace. And again, you know, Vilmos and I are racing around them faster and faster and faster. It's fun. If you can pull it off.
How much you rehearse those before you?
Oh, yeah, it goes on forever because there's so many cues that have to be hit exactly right. It's like those long Steadicam shots. I mean, you know, one thing can just kill you and you have to start all over again.
Why don't you answer your phone? It's the police.
Yeah, that's a drag.
Yes. But it's great when you get it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you always know when you get it, or do you, do you end up doing one more, or do you end up stopping? When
you know, when you get a really complicated shot like that, if you get it once, it's a miracle.
You have also in this movie, which you have in so many of your movies, which I love, is this whole is these great following scenes and following women often from the back.
Right, right.
When Lithgow follows,
yes.
What turns out not to be her. But
right.
Did you use Nancy in the early shots?
No, we had, I think that the girl that plays that is her stand-in. Otherwise, we're getting somebody who looks physically like her.
Right.
We cast girls that look physically like Nancy because the whole idea is he's murdering people that all sort of look the same.
But you never put Nancy in to fool the audience quickly, and then
No, that girl looked very much like Nancy.
She does, yeah, totally.
And we had another girl, stunt girl, when Nancy gets pulled out of the car underneath the water that looked very much like Nancy. You know, until she broke her, until Nancy's in, there's a tank for when Nancy breaks the surface of the water and comes up. But pulling her out, Nancy is incredibly claustrophobic. It was like the scariest moment of my life was putting my wife in that car, because you put her into the car, and then the worst thing for a claustrophobe in the world, you seal the car, and then you start filling it up with water. I mean, I'll never forget, to this day, walking on the set with Nancy and that look on her face. It was like, I'm gonna die. And of course, they didn't tell me, like 2 or 3 takes before, when they were testing the car, it had collapsed. The whole thing had just collapsed. They didn't tell me till afterwards. They seemed to have fixed it. But, and I'll never forget Nancy, you know. It was, you know, it reminds me of the Red Shoes when she's starting to go toward the ballet and then starts walking, turns and runs back. I could see Nancy getting closer to the car and then sort of freezing. And I said, look, I can't do this. We'll figure out a double, we'll do something. She said, no, I've got to do this. And putting her in that car, I mean, she was terrified.
And you're in a tank on a soundstage.
That's correct. But you're still in a sealed car underneath water that's filling up.
You use so many, you know, split screen is something you use a lot, and you also use in a lot of your movies, but in Blowout, there are a lot of split diopter shots too. Do you want to talk a bit about this sort of using the whole screen?
Well, you want to, you know, it's like Greg Tolan in Citizen Kane, you want to keep everything in focus. I don't see anything great about, you know, shooting a shot where somebody in the foreground is in focus and that person in the background is out of focus. What's the value of that? Who wants to look at a blur in the background there, or you rack focus from one to the other, and the person in the foreground is out of focus? Well, a split diopter is that you put they put a piece of focusing glass that's split right on the lens, and you have this focal plane focuses on that, and then you have another focal plane that focuses on this, and you have to figure out where to put the split so the audience isn't very conscious of it. You usually, you know, find an edge of something. And I forget where I started using split diopter shots. I remember Carrie's. There's one where Tommy is in the foreground, they're in class, and he's got that blonde hair, and then you see Carrie way in the background, and she's also in focus. So you have 2 focal planes simultaneously. I mean, in the old days, when we were shooting Citizen Kane, we were on a soundstage, you know, you could have wide-angle lenses that would, and get the f-stop up, you know, so high that you have a tremendous depth of field, and that's why all those things are in focus. But you know, we don't have that luxury. We're using probably fast film, fast lenses, so you have very little depth of field. So that's why there's a lot of, you know, sort of, there's one focal plane, then everything else is out of focus. Plus, split diopter, split screen gives you this contrapuntal juxtaposition of information. And of course, the worst thing about directing is, because directing, you're always saying, look at that. You know, look at that close-up. Look at that medium shot. You're really directing the audience's eye. Unlike on stage, where you have to direct them a little subtly by the way that you position the actors when they turn downstage, when they turn upstage. What the advantage of split screen is that you have this juxtaposition of information, and there could be a synthesis because of the juxtaposition. Mm-hmm. And it's also good for very slow developing things because you have a lot going on. And of course, I first was introduced to it when I shot Dionysus in '69, in which I shot the whole thing in split screen. which is constantly juxtaposing what's happening with the audience and what's happening in the play and how they affect each other.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you came to split screen from shooting a play, even though it's
Well, how do you shoot it? This is an audience environmental play where the audience is affected by what the actors interact with the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know what's going on with the audience in relationship to the play, and I also want to follow the play. So I'm going to put them on the screen at the same time, and sometimes they merge.
giving the audience information in ways that they don't necessarily know they're getting information. There's something about the split diopter, there's something with the split screen, you know you're watching two concurrent or things that are going on at the same time, but that aren't in the same room or in the same, in one case it's the TV, I guess. But so you know that both things are, you should be kind of paying attention to both, but you don't feel the pressure to be, you know, that it's, and I think that's a kind of interesting way to let things develop, like you said, things that develop slowly. The split diopter is so striking. I think that even people who don't know what they're watching, you know, having everything in focus, it again, I think unconsciously makes you watch the whole screen.
Right.
And I think it is a kind of ingenious way to let, because if you just left the TV on in the background, people might just tune it out. And you do that in Dressed to Kill also when he's watching the cross-dressing thing.
Right.
Yeah. But what you're really saying without saying it is, you watch the TV too.
Right.
And I think that's really, but it's so visual at the same time. We mentioned them, but talking about some of the actors, I mean, you use Dennis Franz.
Well, it's interesting, especially for Dennis, and for John, is I sort of created these characters. Dennis has been playing this character that we created in Dressed to Kill for I don't know how long, you know. And John, the sinister John Lithgow, you know, has now been immortalized in Dexter. So
That's right. And you want to talk about working with Travolta and sort of, I mean, when you first used him, he was on Welcome Back, Kotter. You used him in Carrie.
That's correct.
And then from then to Blowout, he's now
huge star.
Yeah,
Huge star.
Saturday Night Fever. And
Well, it was very ironic because initially, Blowout was like a very small picture, you know, because it was so dark. I had conceived it as a very small movie. And then John, I was on the phone with John. He wanted me to read some script he was doing. And he said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing this, you know how this works as a director. I'm doing this, you know, this little picture. It's about a sound guy. And you're never thinking for a moment that he would be interested in this. And, well, John says, why don't you send it to me? And I said, okay. And he really loved it and wanted to do it. And John is a dream to work with. He's, you know, really sweet guy. He's very generous to the other actors. He had worked with Nancy and wanted to work with her again. The only trouble was that the first stuff we shot in Penn Station where he runs, he fell and twisted his ankle. So I had to shoot a whole bunch of stuff without him running for a long time. That was the only problem. But you know, he's wonderful to work with. He has such a wonderful feeling about him. He's so warm and giving. And
there's a gentleness to him.
Yes.
And I think which is great for that character because it makes his obsession and ultimately the which is totally destructive and could be very unappealing. It makes it. You really feel sympathy for him at the end. At the end,
I know.
You don't blame him. You feel like this is a guy like Jimmy Stewart in a way in Vertigo. You feel like this is a guy who had to take it to this conclusion.
Exactly.
Also about Travolta, so in his body in that great way that also feels very physical.
Well, he moves so well.
Yeah.
John, you know, it's like Al. They really move beautifully.
Yeah.
You know, in the old days, you know, so many of these great movie stars, you know, like Cagney and Cary Grant, I mean, they were dancers. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
You know, they moved beautifully, and if you can photograph that, it's sensational.
Yeah, even just the way he's moving the microphone, and there's something so graceful about it. And it also makes something very visual that could be kind of boring to watch. I also love his look in the movie, that red shirt that he has. And how much of that do you think about beforehand, or does it come with the costume design?
Oh, well, we think about that a lot. I mean, we wanted to get him in sort of very basic kind of workman-like outfits. And I think we sort of went to some store on Broad Street and just walked in and put these things on him, these very basic kind of stuff I would wear. It's very functional.
I feel that's true actually of a lot of your characters, particularly the male characters, often do have a jacket, or like Antonio Banderas in Femme Fatale and Craig Wasson in Body Double. There's something, they have a uniform.
Yeah, and Dennis Franz playing me in Body Double with my jacket. We're workers. We have a uniform. We go to work. We don't think about, what we're wearing.
And you like it because it has all the pockets.
Yes, exactly.
The production design is really great in that too. I mean, again, like the Dennis Franz apartment, the green and red walls or so. There's a real, even though it's in color, it does have a really kind of sultry film noir feeling to it that I feel was badly imitated throughout the 80s. There's sort of red lights, but you use a lot of iconic things, but it's so located in real Philadelphia, which is obviously so personal to you.
Yes.
And I know location is a big thing for you. I mean, you design a lot of your shots by going to locations, but in this case, you knew the city so well that when you were writing it, you already kind of could imagine a lot of these things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we used to go park up on Wissahickon Drive. I mean, I knew that location from parking in high school. That incredible bridge over the Wissahickon Creek, and the fish market that's on Broad Street, or Market Street rather. I've walked all over Philadelphia, so I know all those locations. And it's great when you go to a place and you've literally walked all the locations. I mean, sometimes, as you got into bigger movies and you had to travel all over the world, you had I had a very great location guy, Eric, that used to, that I discovered on Body Double. He used to go and find these incredible, like all the untouchable locations. Or Eric is, going all through Chicago, an incredible eye. But there are some movies where I literally walked to all the locations, and this is one of them. Blowout, Femme Fatale. I mean, I really traveled all over Paris, subways, motor scooters. I mean, I found all those places. And if you can take an interesting picture of it, then it may look interesting on film. If you can't take an interesting picture of it, forget it. It's not going to get any better.
This is sort of, since your earlier, the sort of pre-thriller movies, the Greetings and Hi Mom, which were very directly political, this is the first sort of overtly political movie you had made since then. And I know you're very politically minded. And do you want to talk a bit about sort of, in some ways, sort of bringing those two sides together? I mean, bringing sort of politics to this kind of genre.
Well, again, it came out of the Kennedy assassination and, being so obsessed with it, reading all the books.
And you were obsessed with?
Yes, and
did you think, I mean, what was your obsession? Can you talk about that?
Well, what you discover, this is the most intensive investigation ever done on anything. So, of course, much like blow up, the more you blow it up, the less clear it becomes. And after reading the 27,000th book about the assassination, in which they postulated, I think, that they changed the exit wounds to the wounds in the back to the wounds in the front on the plane flying back to Washington, you go, oh my God, I mean, they're carrying the body around, they're changing them. You go, this is getting crazy. So there was that. And then, of course, having lived through the whole beginning of the assassination, seeing those pictures in Life magazine where they showed the Zapruder film frame by frame, that's where I got the idea of syncing the sound up. But again, my conclusion about all this is nobody wants to know anyway anymore. I mean, it's, you know, and all the paranoia, all the assassination paranoia, where all the key witnesses, all, you know, I have that in Greetings, where they're all disappearing and have strange deaths. And
There's this sort of notion of paranoia and conspiracy out in the world, and the ordinary person in some ways opening up a world that's been closed to him, and once it's open...
well, that goes back to being a Kennedy assassination buff. You know, it goes back to Greetings and Hi Mom. I mean, the whole idea of all this information, and, you know, you get obsessed with it. And in this instance, as probably in the Kennedy assassination, nobody cares anymore. Even if you when you have such an intensive investigation, you have so many variations of what happened, so you don't know, and it's like blow up, where all you see is grain when you get so big and big. You can't even discern anything anymore. And this is a kind of investigation that there's, you know, for every, you know, A, you have a B, and for every B, you have a C. So it becomes ultimately a confusing point-counterpoint. The detective at one point, you know, says, who the hell cares about this stuff anyway? I mean, you know, this paranoia stuff. And then, you know, John's saying, well, this is why this is what actually happened. And the guy says, you know, who cares? Nobody cares anymore.
And even at a point, you could almost argue that it's unclear whether or not it matters to Travolta. I mean, it becomes its own obsession.
Yes.
And of course, the real value is him meeting Nancy Allen and making that connection, but then he has to keep going, yeah.
Right, he has to sacrifice her in order to solve this mystery that nobody cares about, basically.
There are a lot of things you set up, like the bad scream in the beginning, the Liberty Day parade, the news clips that are going on, where they feel, just when you're watching the movie, they feel like just color. It feels just like it's filling in the world that they're living in. But as you get going, each one starts to pay off in this way. How much of that stuff did you have in the beginning? How much of it did you find later? Do you remember?
Well, again, it's very much inspired by, you know, sort of, you know, the news, or, you know, how to, and ideas of, if you're going to cover up a murder, you make, like the sleeping car murders, you make the person you really want to kill the third person in the series, and you have to kill a couple before, which is what Lithgow's doing. He's finding girls that look like Nancy, bumping off so it looks not like a political murder, but basically just another crazy serial murderer who's killing a certain type, facial body type. And of course, I grew up in Philadelphia, and all the sort of, you know, iconic images of independence and liberty, they're all there, not to mention the Mummers Parade, which of course I've attended many times. William Penn, all those iconic images that, you know, I lived with as I was growing up in Philadelphia.
What were your feelings about Blow Up? I mean, the movie. I mean, were you a big fan
Well,
of it?
I like Blow Up because Antonioni has this incredible visual sense, you know, and you just sit there and look at these images he creates. And the idea from Blow Up, and as in The Conversation, these are great ideas for movies. So needless to say, in fact, when I remember going on the set of Godfather 2 and interviewing Francis about The Conversation. I wrote an interview piece for some magazine about The Conversation because I really loved The Conversation.
Francis, the sort of famous story is how when Cindy Williams and Frederick Forrest are having that conversation, and we keep hearing it throughout the movie, that he changed the line readings.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The line readings changed.
Right. So the emphasis is different, as our emphasis is different. Did you do anything like that in Blowout?
No, because my movie's basically about syncing, you know, the blowout with, you know, the shot before. So it's boom.
Right.
You know, so there's no cheat of changing the sound. I mean, it's just the fact that he he realizes the tire was shot out. It just didn't blow out.
Whenever you really need to know something, you find a way to do it in a way that's totally clear, but not distracting or doesn't take you out of the movie. You also do it in ways where it almost seems thrown away, but it's totally clear at the same time, like when he jumps in the water and you see the figure on the bridge. But the first time you think you see somebody, but you make sure to go back to the wide again to see the guy going across the bridge.
Exactly.
When you first started to make movies, was this something that, you know, as you got more experience, and by the time of Blowout, you've done this, you know, for a little while now, that you know exactly where everything should be in the frame and what information you need to know when. Is this?
Well, but no, I think this is the great disadvantage that we operate under that we lost because of the studio system. You know, if you listen, you know, read the whole, you know, chronological diary of the making of Psycho. I mean, you know, you have a whole unit on a lot. And you know, you go to the editor and he says, well, that's really great, but you really need a tighter shot here of the hand, and that thing of the body going over the isn't exactly right. So you just call everybody back to the set and reshoot it.
Right.
When did we have those kind of freedoms where you could just go? I mean, when you think about Charlie Chaplin, I have to think about how to do this. How am I going to know it's the girl when she comes by? If she's blind, how's she going to know? How am I going to figure out she's blind? So let's take a month off while I think about this. Right. You know, you think, holy mackerel. I mean, this is a way of making movies that's like a dream.
Yeah.
You know, can you imagine being able to go back and think about, gee, how am I going to do that? That's not right. We'll just reshoot the whole thing. Unbelievable. And so that's, of course, you have a whole very strict vision of how you storyboard, you look at it, you take photographs, but of course you're not going to get it all right the first time. You're going to pick up things as you look at it in the other room. Gee, I need a shot of this, or to make this really work. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
And we're just doomed to try to deal with material we've shot because, you know, you got 8 weeks, that's it, goodbye.
Right, and you only have the location for that day.
Exactly
so
right.
Yeah.
Figure it out, pal.
No, somebody asked me recently what's the hardest aspect of filmmaking, and I think that is the hardest because it's something, not that you want anybody to give you a pass for it, but at the same time you have to get, you know, particularly, I mean, you have 35, 40 days, 40, whatever it is to make, and you have to make your days, and you have to get the movie done.
Right.
And in this budget, and
it's like writing a first draft with a quill pen.
Right.
You know, and you can't go back, cross any T's or anything. It's all got to be perfect.
I mean, did you, when John came on and it got bigger, did you change how you shot it or how you planned it? Or?
The only thing I think got bigger was the Mummers Parade. I don't think I had that extensive sort of running, chasing thing going on. But then I got this sort of, you know, driving down Market Street, and then I got these big ideas with the fireworks and sirens tying sounds in and stuff like that, yeah.
Well, also, your big hit before Blowout was Dressed to Kill,
Yes.
which was very much on your terms anyway. It wasn't like you had done one for them and one for you. You were doing two for you. It's just that Blowout was...
Well, the good thing about Dressed to Kill was it was a very hot script. I had a lot of people bidding for it. So that gives you a lot of power.
Right.
You know, but, you know, you're very lucky when those things happened. It was a very enjoyable experience, the making of the movie, even though we had some, you know, horrendous problems. I mean, of course, the greatest tragedy was, as I was mixing the movie, somebody stole about 10 boxes of original negative.
Wow.
So you're at a mix of a movie in which you don't have the original negative for. And what sequences were they? Not a close-up of Nancy in a room. It was the Mummers Parade.
Oh, wow.
And all those shots, a lot of those shots on Wissahickon Drive, you know, those huge shots of John with his microphone moving around. So we had to go back and reshoot all that stuff.
Wow.
While we were mixing.
On a movie about sound.
Yes, exactly. So that was, I mean, one of the rare directors that's had his negative stolen.
And you, to this day, not know what
I have
happened.
no idea. The truck was taking the original negative from New York to Los Angeles to be cut. It pulled into some place. It was open, and some kids, obviously, or somebody came in and just grabbed a whole bunch of boxes. They didn't even know what it was. And I'll never forget that phone call while I was mixing. And my editor and I running through trying to figure out what boxes they had stolen.
I guess that's an insurance claim.
Yes. Oh, needs to say we could spend as much money as we wanted. But
And where was John at that point? Was he working or?
no, we had to get everybody. It was, but you know, it was one of those things where the filmmaking community rallies together. It is such an extraordinary, horrible thing to happen that we just had people coming from all over, you know. Laszlo came and shot, Vilmos was shooting another picture, so Laszlo came and shot the stuff that we did in Philadelphia that weekend, and we had tons of people.
So it was the stuff in the parade?
The stuff in the parade.
When he's driving through the parade, or?
Driving right down Market Street, right over William Penn, the whole Mummers Parade, the whole deal.
Wow. When you finished Blowout, you went on to make Scarface, yes?
Yes.
I mean, at that point, you had done a number of movies that were, could be sort of typed as De Palma-style movies that were sexy, tense, sometimes violent, sometimes, and you went on then to do Scarface, which was sexy and violent, but in a different way. And you've talked, and I think it's really interesting, about sort of how important you think it is for a director to get away from himself at times.
Yeah, I think you have your own style of film. Well, look at Woody Allen. I mean, you know, he's making movies in Manhattan forever, so they're going to get a little repetitive. He's going to go over the same material again. He'll find different ways to explore it, but his earlier movies seem to be better than some of his later movies. But then he says, oh, I'm going to go to Europe and start making movies. Well, suddenly something new happens. And this is very much the way I've kind of approached my career, where I have very specific ideas, and I get these very visual ideas to make movies, and I construct scripts around them, and they're driven by kind of a visual idea or intellectual idea. And then I will just jump into something that's completely different from anything I've ever done, just to see what happens. And Scarface is, well, what do I know about Cuban gangsters? And I'll just see what happens. You know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You know, so, but I think it's good to get out of your own cliches. Don't start making the same movie over and over again, which is what one tends to do, especially if one is very successful at it.
And you were talking about Blow Up sort of being a great idea, a great movie
Yes.
idea. You talked about Vertigo that way too. Do you want to say a little bit about Hitchcock and Vertigo?
You have to think about what is something, when you're dealing in a certain medium, what is the thing that is best done in that form? I mean, obviously, if you're directing a play on stage, dialogue, character is paramount, because you're sitting in the audience looking, and you have to choreograph the people on stage from basically an audience's point of view. When you're making a movie, you have all kinds of things that you can explore. And what Hitchcock discovered, first is the point of view shot, which is, the idea of somebody walking or looking, and then you showing what they see, and the audience member identifies with the character, whether it be Jimmy Stewart or Cary Grant or whoever it might be, Janet Leigh, and what they are seeing. And this is how we experience life, through points of view shots, which, as we talked about once before, in computer games, which are sometimes old point of view shots, where you really go through the space and explore it from your point of view. So, and what's unique to cinema, unlike any other art form, is that you can show the audience and your character the same piece of information. They see what the character's saying. So you digest that point of view. It's unique to cinema. So a lot of things Hitchcock discovered, which I talk about the grammar of cinema, this is one of the basic building blocks. You know, you'll always notice Hitchcock when somebody's walking up, like going up to the, you know, the creepy house on the hill in Psycho, you know. He's tracking, looking at the house, tracking, looking at the house. You know, puts you in the character's head. Instead of objectifying it, you know, seeing the character walk up to the house. And Vertigo is an example where you follow a character, and because this is a process of getting to know the character purely visually. I mean, the whole following of Kim Novak in the beginning of the movie is he's got some ideas that the husband is stuck in his head, and he's basically observing what she's doing. But of course, what we find out later, she is acting, she is presenting a performance for him to digest as a suicidal person that's obsessed from somebody that's dead, that's going to kill themselves eventually. What's great about it is that what we do as directors is we create these illusions, which are many times actresses, and in the process of Vertigo is he creates this vision of this girl, makes you fall in love with it, and then destroys it and devastates you. And he shows you how he does it. And then what he does is he puts her makeup on and makes her the Kim Novak that we followed in that dream. He creates that illusion, which is what directors do. We create illusions for you to fall in love with. And that's something totally unique to cinema. You know, beautiful women doing exciting, interesting, erotic things. We follow them, we look at them, and we get involved with them. And it's one of the basic tools of movies. You know, it's what's Godard, you know, a gun and a girl. You know, with a gun, when's somebody going to fire it? With a girl, when's somebody going to undress it? So that's movies.
But something Hitchcock does, and that you do too, is a movie like North by Northwest or something where we're very much stuck with Cary Grant and his dilemma, but then suddenly we cut to Washington, D.C., and we see the guys at the table,
right,
and we realize, oh, okay, now they know, and,
right.
And now things change. And we're also suddenly, as you were talking about point of view, we're not trapped in this victim. And you do that here where, well, first when we see, I think the first time is when we see Lithgow change the tire,
right.
We know
something's up.
And then when Nancy Allen goes to Dennis Franz, we also now know
more is up.
As opposed to when he sees the pictures of her, we're still with him and what he discovers, which I think, making a generality, but that maybe the other is more European and this is more American in a way to sort of let you in on it. Is that second nature to you about sort of when to let the audience in?
Well, so much of mysteries is suspension of information.
Right, and when to reveal it.
And when to reveal it, because which I find that genre, as Hitchcock did, very kind of boring. Because the mysteries, most mystery novels, you're just going from one person to another, getting information, you know, and then you're trying to hide stuff from the audience that you reveal later. Mm-hmm. But it consists of a lot of scenes of, you know, driving up to places, interesting characters coming out, and telling you some information, and then you take that information and go somewhere else, you know. And it's a series of sort of interviews of interesting characters giving you more information, and then you hold back information you want to sort of reveal at the end. But I don't find that particularly cinematic, and neither did Hitchcock.
Yeah, so this is a way to open it up in some way cinematically without restricting.
You are making movies, you know, you're not writing mystery novels or doing plays.
Right.
So Hitchcock, of course, the genius of Hitchcock will take something like Dial M for Murder or Rope and do the smart thing. This is a play. I'm going to find a way to shoot it like a play. It's over, you know, plays are rooted to certain time sense, and I'm going to find a way to shoot it that way. That is always Hitchcock's genius, is that, and always a revelation to anybody that's a student of Hitchcock, is it wasn't like I'm going to find a different way to shoot this. He finds the perfect way to shoot this. And you go, wow, that's a really good idea, you know? And he forces himself to come up with ideas that will dramatize something, but he's very aware of the form it's created in initially. You know, the whole idea of, you know, plays, we open them up, we go outside,
Right.
you know, get some air. Well, that's not necessarily the right idea.
Let's talk about the scream.
Well, of course, the scream is a running joke throughout the movie. You know, he's trying to get the perfect scream.
Cut! All right, switch. Betty, you pull ahead. Gene, you scream.
Take 29.
And of course, ironically, the perfect scream is Nancy being killed by John Lithgow at the top of that building during those festivities. And in fact, that is Nancy's scream that we dub into the girl's voice at the end of the movie.
A cut I love in the movie is when you shoot it in a two-shot, a fairly wide two-shot, when he first goes into the when he goes to visit her in the hospital, and she's gotten out of bed and she's
Yes.
woozy from the medication, and then she sits down and he starts talking to her and he makes her laugh, and you cut to the close-up as she covers her face.
Yeah, I don't have my makeup on.
Yeah, it's like way visually to connect those two, and then I think the score comes in. That sort of what I was saying. That sort of
The
melancholy.
piano, da, 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 yeah.
Yeah, the score in some ways enhances their connection and the love story, but it also, I think, kind of unconsciously sets you up for something tragic.
Are you leaving?
Yeah, I gotta go. But,
But I love cuts like that. I was thinking of like the cut in Vertigo when he's with Midge and he's showing her that he's fine and he's like going up and down, up and down, up and down, and then bang, you go
Yeah.
into the close-up.
And then the 10 floors below.
When you're shooting that, do you cover the whole thing in the wide and
Cover?
No. I'm saying just shoot. Did you shoot the whole scene in the wide and then do her close up, or did you know that you're going to go right on that cut, so you just cut the scene and you go in and just do what you know you're going to use?
Well, in many instances, you set up, you know, the wide shot to see what the actors are doing. It's a two-character scene. And when you do character scenes, you want to let the actors dominate the stage. So you try to, and you watch what they do. You know, much like a location, you see what they're doing, and then you figure out where to put the camera in order to maximize the effect of what they're doing. And then as you go through the scene and you watch in the master shot, you see them doing things that you say, well, maybe I should go in closer for that. And that, when Nancy did that, I'd probably say, I should, you know, this is a good time to cut into her face.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I shoot everything, seeing as I have no action shots. But
Yeah, but you look at the scene.
Yeah, you let
you
the
watch the actors. They do things, you know.
I think because you do so many kind of, in some cases, epic camera work, and you have, I mean, it's kind of even iconic the way you know, certain shots that you tend to use and sequences in your movies. But I struck in Blowout, there's a lot of just great two shots with just the actors in the room.
Absolutely.
You know, with John and Nancy
There are places for those two shots. You just have to figure out what they're doing and where it fits into the scenario.
Right, and there are not a lot of close-ups. I mean, it's like you use, it's the whole thing of using the close-up when it really counts.
Well, in Casualties of War, I think I have one big close-up is when, you know, Michael Fox is, you know, witnessing the rape scene. It's the only close-up in the movie, you know. So if you look at older movies, you'll realize, my God, they're photographing their whole bodies. They're letting them use their hands and walk around. And instead of this television thing where everybody, we were watching that movie the other day. What was that movie we were watching the other day? It was like one close-up after another. It was relentless.
Awful.
And it was like tighter and tighter.
Yeah.
Three people talking at a table, bam, 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 bam. It's like, give me a break. I mean, the close-up is a great thing to use, but you know, it's like banging a drum over and over and over again.
I'm sort of thinking about also, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, I know the studio is very unhappy with the ending. Do you want to talk about that?
I remember when they were lighting up, you know, when John runs to try to save Nancy. This was such a huge location to light. we spent one whole night lighting it, and the sun came up. I mean, it was like we never got a shot off because it took us all night to light the location. And Bilbos is going, my God, this location, it's so big, I don't know what to do. And of course, we had to place those. Those are not digital fireworks. We have the fireworks people placing fireworks in the frame. You know, our panning shots, there are the fireworks going. Well, I was in a very unique position, which seldom a director gets in, that my producer, George Lido, became head of the studio. He took over Filmways, and having made such a big hit of Dress to Kill, you know, you can sort of make anything you want. So, and never, of course, they all read the script, but they never quite realize what it's all going to be at the end. They think, oh, it's another De Palma thriller. This will be terrific. It's going to be like Dress to Kill 2. And when I showed it to the executives, they were like, because the ending's so shocking, they go, oh my God, what a downer this is. But there was nothing to be done. I mean, my producer ran the studio. So it was basically, you know, release it, let's see what happens. And of course, it didn't do well at all.
And do you think it's because of the ending, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Hitchcock had similar problems with Vertigo. I mean, it's such a stunning ending, but such a devastating ending.
Yeah.
You go, oh my God. But you remember those endings forever. All he's done, all he's sacrificed, people have died, and now it's just a scream in a horror movie. You know, that's a sad reality of life.
Now that's a scream!
Jack,
More on the screen.
I don't want to distort it.
Come on, bring it up, bring it up. We'll
All
see
right,
what
I'll
we
give
got
you a
there.
little bit more the next time.
That's wonderful.
What'd you think the rest of the mix?
Well, okay, we bring on the beginning, you know, when he was from the footsteps up.
It's a good scream.